Have you ever thought about the purpose of your family being together? It's incredible how family connections can unfold in unexpected ways. My name is Ruth. I'm a 32-year-old homemaker, living with my husband Samuel and our 3-year-old daughter Jessica. However, recently, Samuel's father passed away. Samuel said,
"Leaving Mom to live alone would be unfair. I should live with her."
With these thoughts, we were forcibly relocated to our in-laws' house. The place is surrounded by vegetable gardens, providing a natural environment suitable for raising Jessica. However, the house is quite old and needs repairs in various areas. Despite being only 65 years old, Samuel's mother insists she can live alone without any health issues. Nevertheless, Samuel insisted on moving to his parents' home. Before we knew it, Samuel's sister Melissa also decided to live there, saying,
"It wouldn't be right to leave Mom's care solely to Samuel. I'll live here too."
Melissa had initially talked about taking care of her mother, but in reality, she didn't contribute to household chores at all. She pushed everything onto me. Melissa works part-time and has been divorced, lived alone until now. She wanted to return to her parents' home, but apparently, her father didn't allow it while he was alive. According to their mother, Melissa's infidelity caused the divorce, and their angry father forbade her from returning to the family home. Now that their father has passed away, Melissa finally returned, regardless of whether Samuel and I live there too. She probably intended to take care of her mother, but with our presence, she conveniently leaves the household tasks to me. Melissa thought the part-time income alone made it difficult to pay the rent, but living with the in-laws meant no rent, and perhaps Samuel would cover expenses like food. Melissa, having moved in, soon demanded,
"Since my part-time pay is low, Samuel will take care of my living expenses too. I'll do the housework, so that should be fine, right?"
However, she barely did any housework, occasionally cleaning the entrance. Samuel, seemingly unable to stand up to Melissa, didn't complain or ask for living expenses, and instead, the mother-in-law used her pension to cover Melissa's costs. I couldn't agree with this, so I told the mother-in-law, "You don't have to pay. We'll manage with Samuel's salary," but she replied,
"Don't worry about it. I'm using the survivor's pension from my late husband, so it's fine."
The kind-hearted mother-in-law just smiled. The mother-in-law, truly gentle and submissive, allowed Samuel and Melissa to do as they pleased. Samuel, even before moving in, rarely cared for Jessica, and after the move, stopped helping with childcare altogether. On holidays, he'd go out, leaving Jessica without playtime. The mother-in-law filled in, so Jessica wasn't lonely, but I worried about her feelings towards Samuel. Even after work on weekdays, he'd go drinking with Melissa, reducing Jessica's time with him. I was concerned about their relationship and also worried about his finances, given his frequent outings. Melissa has recently stopped going to her part-time job and sleeps until noon every day, then goes out drinking with Samuel at night. It doesn't affect our household finances since she doesn't contribute, but the thought of Samuel paying for all the drinks is frightening. If Samuel, who isn't a high earner, is paying for Melissa's share as well, his salary will quickly deplete. Feeling unsettled, I decided to organize a birthday party for Jessica as a distraction since her birthday was approaching. Jessica and my mother-in-law were thrilled, but Samuel was not enthusiastic. Samuel said,
"Do we really need to have a birthday party now?"
Melissa also disapproved, saying,
"Birthdays happen every year. There's no need to make a fuss."
Annoyed by Samuel lounging around the house, I asked, "If you're free, could you go shopping? I'll give you the money, please." He reluctantly began to prepare for shopping. Seeing this, Melissa said,
"I'm bored at home too, so I'll go with him,"
and followed Samuel out. After a while, Samuel called my smartphone, but I was cooking and couldn't answer. Jessica, who had always wanted to use the smartphone, took it to my mother-in-law and started fiddling with it. My mother-in-law tried to answer in haste. Jessica accidentally turned on the speaker, and it seemed they answered the call. I rushed over to them, and Samuel, thinking the smartphone was malfunctioning and not connected, began talking to Melissa on the other end. Samuel said,
"Ruth isn't answering the phone. The money she gave isn't enough. What should we do?"
It seemed he thought the call had disconnected, and Melissa responded as usual. Melissa said,
"Speaking of money, should we carry out that plan we joked about before? We've already spent the inheritance from Dad, and now it's time for Mom to go to the other world, isn't it?"
I was shocked by such a raw statement, but my mother-in-law calmly used the smartphone's recording function to document Samuel and Melissa's conversation. Unaware of this, Samuel said,
"How are we going to make it look like an accident? Push her down the stairs or something?"
I thought such extreme statements were not for children's ears, so I took Jessica to the kitchen. My mother-in-law listened to their conversation with a grave expression. Oblivious Melissa said,
"Wouldn't it be best if she got run over by a car? If it's a car, we can also get auto insurance, no mistake."
She spoke of such a terrifying plan nonchalantly, laughing. Eventually, their conversation shifted to a different topic, so my mother-in-law stopped the recording and ended the call, but she was red with anger, a stark contrast to her usually calm demeanor. I felt anger, but more than that, I was at a loss for how to face Samuel and Melissa when they returned, contemplating taking their own mother's life. I was too scared to interact with them as usual, and the thought of living with such people filled me with anxiety. It seemed I had turned pale without realizing it.
"Mom, what's wrong? Your face is all white."
Jessica pointed it out. In a panic, I forced a smile, but I started to think it would be better to leave this house for Jessica's sake. I contacted the police immediately, but they said the evidence was too weak to establish a case for attempted murder. They didn't take it seriously, saying it was a domestic matter. My mother-in-law seemed to understand my thoughts.
Leave the rest to me. You and Jessica should leave this place. I'll contact your parents, so start preparing to leave. I can't let you and precious Jessica stay with such dangerous people."
Her tone was stern, though her face had returned to its gentle expression. As instructed by my mother-in-law, I began packing to leave the in-laws' house.
"What about my birthday party?"
She asked, looking sad, so I reassured her. "We're going to celebrate with your grandparents at Mom's house because they want to celebrate with you too." Convinced that my parents also wanted to celebrate, Jessica looked relieved. After a while, Samuel and Melissa, who knew nothing, returned.
"I didn't buy anything because there wasn't enough money."
Samuel shouted angrily. Melissa followed up.
"It was a wasted trip, but you still owe me for my time. My hourly rate is high, so you owe me about $100.
She said something ridiculous. To them, my mother-in-law said,
"Stop talking nonsense and sit down. I have something to tell you."
Even as they smirked and joked, My mother-in-law ordered sternly.
Just sit down and be quiet.
She seemed genuinely angry, shouting at Samuel and Melissa in a voice I had never heard before. Samuel and Melissa, realizing something was wrong, sat down quietly in front of her, and then my mother-in-law called out to me.
Ruth, please join us for this conversation. And could you lend me your smartphone?
I let Jessica play by herself and sat next to my mother-in-law, setting up my smartphone so that the recording of Samuel and Melissa's conversation could be played immediately. Samuel and Melissa, unaware that their conversation had been recorded, looked complacent. But when they heard their own scheming from my smartphone, they were so shocked they almost jumped.
Why did you record that? When did you install a hidden microphone?
Samuel stood up, making a scene. Melissa, with wide eyes.
Isn't this the conversation we had when we went shopping?
She screamed but couldn't say anything more. To the astonished pair, my mother-in-law said,
Jessica answered Samuel's phone, but you thought the call was answered, did you? But the call was connected the whole time, so I was able to record all of your plotting. Planning to send your own mother to the afterlife under the guise of an accident. Isn't that a bit too much like a drama? And what about the two of you living such a degenerate life? Samuel, you come home every night from drinking and push all the housework and childcare onto Ruth. And Melissa, have you quit your part-time job? Just lazing around without working.
She exposed their misdeeds and continued to scold them. Melissa quickly made excuses.
I never thought of doing such a thing to Mother. It was Samuel who suggested making it look like an accident, and I tried to stop him. Samuel is the bad one.
She shifted the blame onto Samuel. Samuel, pointing at Melissa.
It was you who came up with the plan. I wasn't keen on it, but you pushed ahead so forcefully that I reluctantly agreed. You're the bad one.
They began to blame each other, and both my mother-in-law and I sighed in dismay. My mother-in-law's anger seemed to grow.
I don't want things to go your way, so I'm going back to my parents' house. You two can do as you please. I'll have Ruth and Jessica leave this place too.
She spoke coldly. Samuel and Melissa, who had been blaming each other just moments ago, suddenly looked cheerful. Samuel exclaimed with joy.
What? Mom, Ruth and Jessica are leaving? Then this house is mine.
To which Melissa shouted back with a smile.
What are you talking about? Half of it is mine.
After their plan to kill their mother was exposed, and fearing how much they would be scolded, the two of them became ecstatic at her unexpected announcement. It seemed they didn't care about my going back to my parents' house either, as I left the noisy Samuel behind and took Jessica out of the in-laws' house. My mother-in-law seemed sad to part with Jessica.
Don't forget about your grandma, okay?
She said with tears in her eyes. Jessica, still not fully understanding the situation, asked.
Is Grandma going somewhere? Too?
I reassured my mother-in-law. Don't worry, once things settle down, I'll definitely bring Jessica to visit. But something was bothering me, so I asked my mother-in-law. Is it really okay to hand over this house and land to Samuel and his sister? They were planning something so terrible, weren't they? To my angry question, my mother-in-law replied with a smile.
This area is a city planning zone, so they can't just sell the land, and the house isn't livable without repairs. I'm not at all upset about giving this house and land to those two. The property tax is high, and it's been a problem. They'll be the ones regretting it once they find out the truth.
My parents warmly welcomed Jessica and me when we returned home. It seems my mother-in-law had also contacted them.
I heard from Samuel's mother about the situation. Such terrible people. You should divorce that man right away.
My father said angrily. My mother, holding Jessica, added,
It's pitiful for Jessica to have such a person as a father.
She seemed unable to contain her anger. A few days later, when I went back to my in-laws' house to collect the rest of my belongings.
Did you know this land couldn't be sold? The real estate agent told me it can't be developed into residential land, so it can't be sold. We can't get any cash this way.
Samuel yelled. And Melissa also started shouting.
It's all your fault, Ruth. This happened because you asked us to go shopping.
Their faces turned from joy to near tears. Moreover, the day we left, the wind was so strong that part of the roof was torn off, making the house unlivable. The two of them, now without the reliable mother-in-law to turn to for repairs, were helpless. You can't expect to treat your family with such disregard and still receive an inheritance properly. Take responsibility for the trouble you've caused, I said, and then I thrust the divorce papers at Samuel and made him sign. Afterward, Samuel and Melissa had to live in the broken house while repaying their debts. They had accumulated debt believing they would inherit a large sum from the mother-in-law, and it seemed impossible to manage on Samuel's earnings alone, especially since Melissa apparently had no intention of working. From the damaged house, the sound of their quarreling could be heard echoing. Having returned to my parents' home, I was approached by the company I worked for before giving birth and started working again. With my parents taking care of Jessica, I could work with peace of mind. My mother-in-law has been in touch, so Jessica and I go to visit her. Jessica missed her grandmother but didn't say anything about not seeing Samuel, making me realize that the child indeed watches adults closely.
How did you like this story? Please remember to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story.